Doing a quick little jaunt here in the 005 to start. I've been running in the Mountain Coast H1, of course, a lot more than the 005. I did test the 005 with the Superfeet carbon fiber insoles, but that's a totally different experience than running in the shoe without those insoles. Stock insoles in here. I actually just want to get a little bit acquainted with the 005, the feel underfoot, before I go ahead and go straight AB one shoe on each foot. I have been doing quite a lot of insole testing recently, but for this test, I am going with the stock insoles. I've got the Mountain Coast H1 stock Ortholite insoles, and I have my 005 here in the larger US 10.5. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But I've got actually both stock insoles. I've got the race insole at the bottom and the regular insole on top of it. The 005 in a full size up US 10.5 here for me is correct in length, but I talked about this in the insole review. Quite a lot of volume in that shoe width-wise across the forefoot and pretty much throughout, even around the middle of the shoe. So I've been doubling up these insoles here, and that was one of the reasons why it was a good candidate to test that thicker Run Pacer Elite carbon fiber insole. Absolutely a different feel here with the out-of-the-box setup compared to those Superfeet carbon fiber insoles. Definitely more appropriate to test with the stock setup, of course. Kind of liking the feel here. I did like the feel with the carbon fiber. It was just different. You know, you take the shoe, make it stiffer, more protective for sure, adds a little bit of weight. It really turns it into a different shoe. I actually haven't run in the 005 a little while. That's kind of why I'm doing a little test run here before I really get started. It's really nice. So soft, so smooth, so adaptable. I actually ran this shoe out here in Wilson Creek. I did a 20 miler this year in the 005, but the smaller size, the US 10. So I've got the half size up here, and definitely feels better with those two insoles in there and a little bit of a thicker sock. So I just run anatomic comfort here. So I'm about to pop on one shoe on each foot, but just off the bat, I want to emphasize the 005 is an awesome trail running shoe. Definitely in contention for the shoe of the year, surely, you know, in the top upper echelon at least. There's a price difference with the H1. I can talk about that a little bit more, but the shoe itself, putting that aside, amazing. So that was a quick 2 miler there. Actually got a little warm. It was freezing cold when we got out of the car and ran into a headwind, really cold, but on the way back, tailwind, I got kind of warm, so I'm gonna take this Gore Concurve jacket off before I head out, but I'll leave it on now while I change. All right, I'm gonna put the H1 on my left foot for the only reason that I have the stride pod already fixed on my right shoe there. With these, you know, this quick lace kind of thing, it's a little more of a squeeze to get the stride pod onto the H1s. All right, so I do have my lacing here that I learned over in Germany. I put these laces 1 row down. So the standard top laces cover 3 rows. Now they cover 4. And this works much better. I get a much better foothold around the middle of the shoes. In this, I guess you would call it, this is the middle eyelet. One third from the bottom, 4th from the top. I've got an overlap here. So the blue laces and the white laces are covering that. This allows me to give a pretty solid hold right around here, but above the forefoot. So I do want to snug this enough that I get decent foothold without squeezing. All right, let's see how they feel. I know I've got the spec sheet in my pocket for reference during the run, and I know that the Mountain Coast shoe is a higher stack, and I definitely do feel that, especially under the forefoot. A little bit more stack under there. Drop feels about equal. They both feel really well balanced. You can see the width here. It's probably about equal. I think the forefoot is very close, and just by eye and by feel, they do feel that way. Feels like the H1 has a bit higher drop, but I don't think it does. I think this 005 is spec'd at a 7 mil drop, and this one is spec'd at 6. But I think that something about the geometry, I'm sure even before I run it, this is more of a straight ahead oriented shoe, whereas this one is probably more adaptable. This doesn't effectively feel, I mean, not that I could feel a 1 mil difference in drop, but it doesn't effectively feel higher relatively than the H1. But again, I think that's just due to the geometry. Okay, let's go run. I'll start off by saying here that there is not a drastic difference in feel straight out of the gate with both of these shoes. I've got a 14-mile route planned for today, but my wife and daughter are out mountain biking. Pretty cold out here. I might not do the whole thing. Might kind of mix it up a little. But for say 14 miles, maybe 2 hours or so, I don't know. I don't think it would be an issue at all having two different shoes on my feet here. They're really that close. If I didn't know which shoe was on which foot, I of course would be able to tell. They definitely feel a little different, but not drastic in the way that I can't run with different shoes on each foot, so they're pretty close. You've got 3427 with the 005 Arnatel TPEE, of course. I've got 3630 with the Mount Coast H1. They do not exactly specify the midsole foam. They do use the term PIBA-like throughout a lot of their official descriptions, so it's in the same realm of, say, PIBA and the TPEE here in the 005, at least in terms of feel and performance. I do have the race insole underneath the regular insole here with the 005, so I think it's maybe a millimeter, something like that. So putting it at maybe 35-28 underfoot with the 005 on my right foot here, I can still feel the difference. The H1 feels just effectively a little higher, especially with the specs 30 under the forefoot with the H1 and 27 with the 005. I do feel that noticeable difference. Forefoot feels slightly more substantial than the 005. It could also be maybe the width in general of the 005. Just feels like my foot is able to kind of spread out a little bit more, and also through the midfoot of the shoe from the forefoot, that could lead it to feel slightly thinner. It doesn't feel like a thin shoe by any means under the forefoot. It's just compared to the H1, I think the foam is also a little bit firmer. The TPEE, of course, super soft in the Norda, so that could be the difference in forefoot feel there. Let's talk about sizing here. I do have both of these models in two different sizes, so I hope you'll see this as perhaps one of the more definitive looks at sizing. H1, I started out in a 9.5 and talked about this in my review. Feels okay, just a little bit of big toe rubbing. I got a 10 now, US 10 in the H1, and it's just the perfect fit. So I would recommend going half size up in the H1. Don't size down. It is a roomy shoe, but with my little modified lacing trick and also generally the dual lacing setup, you should be able to lock down enough as long as you don't have a very, very thin foot. If you do have a very, very thin foot, perhaps you're a road runner, then you might go true to size, and then you'll be maybe squeezed at the front, but you might be fine with that. The 005, on the other hand, I actually started out with the US 10. I actually raced a 20-miler out here on these exact trails in that shoe, but over time it just felt like the 005 was definitely short, even at a half size up. They recommend you go in a half size up, but I've got a full size up here, so 10.5 in the 005 compared to the 10 in the H1, and sizing is equivalent there lengthwise. Depending on your foot volume, you may experience additional extra space inside the shoe if you do go a full size up, which I do get, but again, I put the two insoles on top of each other and they feel really great. I'm actually not sure which socks I had initially tested this shoe with, but I've got those Sidus Run and Atomic Comfort, a little thicker in the toes and the heel, and they feel really great. Those with the two insoles, they don't feel loose at all. They actually feel amazing right now. So ultimately, I would say that you'll be a half size larger in the 005 compared to the H1. What exact size you get, that's gonna, again, depend on how you size your shoes. For me, I'm a full size up for my true to size in the 005 and a half in the H1. Arch contouring, another hot topic in my comment sections. It's definitely there in the H1, although I wouldn't say it's as prominent as something like a Topo. Topo feels like it really kind of sticks up a little bit more in one particular spot. The H1 seems a little more gradual, and I mentioned it in the review, feels like it's a little slightly further back towards the heel of the shoe, leading into the arch area. I don't find it obtrusive at all, but in comparison, the 005 definitely feels flatter underfoot, a little bit flatter under the arch. One of the reasons why that Superfeet insole worked well in there. Generally, you still feel that 7mm-ish drop. Maybe it effectively feels more like 5 or 6 based on comparison with the H1 here. Maybe even 4 or 5. Put the ground platforms up there. Pretty much the same under the forefoot. The Norda is a touch wider under the middle of the shoe and the heel. And that's kind of a feature of all of Norda shoes. If you looked at the bottom of even the 001 and the 002, they definitely don't really pull in under the arch of the shoe like a lot of shoes. The H1 does slightly. It's not narrow at all. It's pretty close to the 005 here. But those 005 and other Norda models, they're pretty wide under the middle of the shoe. You feel like you're getting like kind of a flattish traction pad under your foot, and with no plates in any of these shoes, I think it really works well because it just, the bottom of the shoe adapts to the ground, contours over everything, and you really get like a kind of full platform front to back traction wise. Of course, you got Vibram Mega Grip Elite with the 005, Versa Grip with the H1. You're gonna get, ooh, slipping there, rocks though. You're gonna get pretty decent traction with the 005, but I think the lugs are really far spaced out, and it's not really the best in super muddy terrain. I would think there's just not a lot of lugs there. They are 4mm compared to the H1's 2mm though. H1 clearly not designed as a specific trail shoe, but a lot of trail shoes, depending on the terrain, more runnable stuff, especially if you're not dealing with mud, you can get away with lighter lugs. You can see them covering a lot of dry, rocky stuff here. Bit loose sections. I don't have any issues with traction in either shoe. I would say in this type of terrain, not going to be much to put between these shoes. Really when you get into mud, but again, I don't think either shoe would do particularly well in any type of real mud. So I just came through there. Pretty amazing canyon here. It's kind of like a hidden gem. It's not a secret trail or anything like that, but when I first came out here, you would never imagine that something like this is pretty much an hour from Boise. So the races and the route that I typically take goes up here. It's the China Ditch. I think it's China Wall. They had built a wall here. I don't know all the historical details. I don't really want to say too much about it in case I'm wrong, but I'm gonna head this way because every time in the race I go up there and we loop around back around this way to the start, I want to run back this way also. So I'm gonna head this way and see what's over there because I have never been that way. Forefoot width, again, the same. If you take a look at the Norda here, it's definitely wider. You could see under the middle of the shoe, quite wide in fact, and also the rear. More traditional, I think, with the H1, but still not particularly narrow under the middle of the shoe. It tapers a little bit more and a little less wide here. I feel flatter inside the Norda shoe. You could kind of see, at least it feels a little bit wider here. I feel like my shoe is overall really, the whole foot is on the ground. I feel very adaptable, especially with the flexibility of the shoe. I feel like anywhere I land, the shoe just adapts, feels great. The H1, on the other hand, it feels more forward oriented. Mentioned this earlier, it doesn't feel like it contours as much. The foam is nice and soft and responsive. It's not as soft as the TPEE here. This is definitely a softer foam, but this is close, and it may even be more reactive, more responsive off the ground, but not as contoury as you feel with the 005. The 005, it feels amazing at times. Running through that canyon there, twisting and turning, it feels great. This shoe, it's not lagging far behind, but it feels like it definitely wants to go forward more than it wants to kind of twist and turn, which is by design, of course. I think I was sort of paying attention to the Backyard Ultra down at Biggs, and I definitely saw this shoe a lot down there. They have some Mount to Coast athletes that did very well, ran many days in this shoe in particular. Of course, I think, again, forward oriented, it's more supportive, a little bit more cushion, and this one, it feels, it's definitely more of a trail, for real trail shoe, whereas this one is adaptable and definitely good on trails, but you're definitely going to be better running this shoe on roads than this one. This feels a little too soft, not as supportive, and just too flexible for the roads. The roads you want a little help because you're generally just going straight more or less. It is a hybrid shoe, definitely going to be more versatile in that regard, but on trails, of course, this one's going to win out, and it feels, man, they're close, and they're both great so far. So I'll carry on and see what else comes to mind. There's a pretty cool trail over here. Definitely have to hop around a bit more. A tumbleweed in the way. Hopping to avoid that. But I definitely feel more adaptable, more trail adaptable with the 005, but you can see I'm handling it no problem in the H1. So it's clearly almost in the same realm. It's just, I would say, the feel of it on running, this type of running, of course, with the H1 feels a little bit stiffer than the 005, but that's not really, putting down the H1. Most shoes gonna feel stiffer than the 005. So I'd say you generally have to really take into account what is the terrain that you're really running on. If I'm running in this, I can certainly run it probably just as well with both shoes. I didn't mention the sizing. I had 8.7 ounces with my 005 here, 8.8 with the H1, but I do have that extra insole in 005, so they're effectively both sub 9 ounce shoes, which is pretty incredible for what you're getting out of both shoes. So I would say if you're really not running on rugged trails, I think you could do just as well with the H1 as you could with the 005. If you love that adaptable, kind of softer feel, for sure, 005 definitely be more appealing to you. But again, it depends, I would say, between these two, highly on preference and also, of course, highly on price. $325 with the 005 and $160 with the H1, so half the price. Incredible. And you're getting almost all the way there. with this shoe, and beyond in terms of versatility on lighter trails, on road, of course. You're gonna feel more comfortable, and it's just gonna perform better on those types of terrain than the 005. Okay, let's see. So before I head back in there, I'm gonna run up and down over here, get a little bit of a steeper up and down test. Let's see. So I did feel maybe like one or two little slips there with the H1s there, a little bit loss of traction on some of the steeper parts. Not too bad though, really not. And some of those were a little steep and definitely loose. But I did feel like my left foot had to put a little bit more pressure into the ball of the foot to make sure as I was going up there that it would like really push in and use that force to not slip out. The 005 on the other hand felt like I could just put my foot down, didn't really have to think about it. Again, the lugs are not, they're not real massive lugs here, but it does adapt over the ground. So I felt like I could just put my foot down and it would kind of contour and grab on whatever I was stepping on there. So a little bit more confidence. But again, I did run this race and had a kind of climbing out of a ditch in January and had a big skid out with the 005. So again, it's not the best trail outsole, but it's pretty good. And compared to say 2 mil here, clearly a hybrid outsole here, they're giving you a little bit more than a road shoe, good for light trails, and adequate on most runnable trails, let's say. All right, so both shoes performed pretty well on that steep downhill. That was a little rocky, a little bit scary at times. I was definitely a little bit cautious on there. Had the camera in one hand and kind of like using only one hand for balance, and it would be more or less one hand or wreck my camera if I wanted to use two hands if I take a spill. So a little bit cautious, but got a feel for them. As long as you're not in that type of steep and rugged ups and downs all day long, I mean, perhaps you are, I think that H1 is going to perform adequately to handle that in small spots like that compared to the 005. If you're in that all day, I think I would like the feel of the 005. It feels like a more low slung shoe. The feel of it is just lower and kind of squatter on the ground compared to the H1. Feels a touch taller. There's added stack, but I don't think it's just the stack. A lot of it is just the geometry of the shoe itself. Again, more forward oriented, not as kind of twisty turny adaptable as the Norda. Have to say again, I'm loving the new lacing setup I have with the H1. I really, it's giving me a lot better midfoot hold. It's performing a lot better for me on real trail terrain, like a lot of the stuff I'm running here today. So I want to pop both shoes off here, talk a little bit about protection. I'm running on sometimes rocks like this, a little bit sharper back there, mostly avoidable over here, but in terrain that you may be running in, could be not unavoidable, let's say. It does feel like this H1 is more protective. You've got 30 under the forefoot, and it's a little bit firmer, I would say. A little bit of, it's definitely a high rebound foam, definitely soft and reactive, but the 005 just feels super soft. It just feels very soft. They feel like equally reactive, but this one has a softer feel. You know, this one feels slightly firmer, but this one feels just as reactive, even though it's softer. I do feel perhaps it's the extra 4 millimeters and the difference in foam. It feels more protective underfoot. I have a little bit more when I'm stepping on those rocks. I was talking about this shoe being so flexible. I wanted to do this once again around the forefoot. Look at that there, and again how it contours. You could see how maybe something sharp would just easily push into there, and that's kind of one of the reasons why I haven't really taken this on a long ultra. I'm just not certain that my feet are up to the task of taking repeated kind of rock hits through this soft contour. It feels great a day like today, whatever I'm gonna run. I raced 20 miles out here on this terrain and it was awesome. Just say 100K, 100 mile, my feet personally, I think that would be a little bit, and that was one of the reasons why I really wanted to try out those carbon fiber insoles in this shoe, just to give it a little bit more protection, not just the carbon fiber aspect. This one, it's flexible still, but a little bit more kind of torsion needed to kind of twist it. It's close. Again, I could really fold it over if I wanted to, but this one just seems so much easier. Like I could definitely twist it with less force. And the forefoot, it does contour the same way, but again, I feel like I have to push a little bit, a touch more into it to get that same level of contour that I get when I'm just with this one here. Of course, you've got the full coverage rubber here, so a little bit different. You have this kind of spot right here, so it does give a little in that area, and there's a couple of small cutouts there. It's close to this shoe, but perhaps it's more, I guess, the difference in stack height and the flexibility of the shoe versus the contouring. Because this one, it really contours well, but again, I feel like I just have to push, I'm putting more force to get the same level of contour that I'm getting with the 005 here. Now that I got them both mostly laced up, you might have noticed I did have a lace locking going on here, but I got rid of it. I don't think I need it. That might have been left over when I was running this shoe with only the one standard insole in there. Again, as I mentioned in the beginning, I've got the two insoles on top of each other. The race insole is very thin and it doesn't have, you know, the edging around the sides of the foot. So with that and this more, I guess, a regular thickness sock here, it feels great. So I don't think I need this contouring. Both uppers, Dyneema upper here, of course, with the 005. You've got this Kevlar aramid weave here with the mount to coast jacquard upper section. Very comfortable uppers, very durable. Can't say anything bad about either upper. I like them both. Of course, this one is definitely more minimal. You have essentially no heel counter in the 005. It's very loose and light. This one you have more traditional padding around and more of a structured, you know, the heel counter comes up to here. So this is more of your standard shoe, and again, it's going to give you more, I guess, stability for longer ultras. You know, people are running this out in the backyard ultra 4 days out there. This is going to feel more regular. This is going to be a little minimal, but it really holds the heel, cups it really well. Again, I had that lace locking. I think that was from earlier when I didn't have the two insoles in there. It doesn't feel like I need it anymore. It does wrap really well. If you have a narrow heel, maybe, again, I'm also a full size up here, so I didn't do any of that lace locking, of course, with my standard or Norda recommended size 10, which I think is still too short. It's definitely short compared to other 10s. Yeah, definitely fine here without the lace lock. It feels a little looser around the ankle, but I, just personal preference, like to have it really tight around the ankle, but it is unnecessary. Feels looser, but totally fine heel hold without the lace lock. All right, final thoughts here. Look, you probably know where I'm gonna go with this. Both shoes, great shoes. Probably, possibly, we'll see, 1-2 for trail shoe or shoe of the year. Maybe more so in the case of the H1. I love both shoes. Pure trail running, the 005 feels great. You know I love a flexible trail shoe, flexible and lightweight. Of course, both of these shoes are really the lightest shoes on the market that you can get at this, stack height and range of terrain you can cover. So for pure trails, I would give the 005 the advantage, but the H1 is going to get you a lot of the way there, most of the way there. And again, it's going to depend on the terrain that you're actually running in. You can cover what you see in front of you right now easily, just as easily in the H1 as the 005. Pure versatility. The edge, of course, has to go to the H1. I had both of these shoes with me in my trip out to Germany, and I wore the H1 all the time, albeit my legs were kind of banged up after running a marathon. Didn't get into as much trail terrain as I would have liked to, but there are many light paths, gravel paths, river paths over there in Germany, of course, on the road as well. I ran along the Isar in Munich, and I used the H1 all the time, bunch of runs, and I didn't run in the 005 at all. Not that I couldn't have, it's just that versatility wise, especially if you're going to be mixing in road running, you got to give the edge to the H1. Okay, here it comes. The price, $325 for the 005, $160 for the Mount to Coast, plus 10% off. Use my discount code HumbleRunning down below. I can't tell anyone to go out and spend $325 on any shoe for that matter. That is a personal decision, of course. Some people have no problem paying that amount for the highest quality shoe, materials, design, everything that comes along with Norda, and I'm not there to dispute any of that. Top quality midsole. This is one of the best running shoes out there on the market right now. If you are able and willing to pay that price, you're not getting hoodwinked for your money. You're getting a top quality shoe, perhaps the best shoe out on the market. That being said, you can get close here at less than half the price with the H1, and you're going to have versatility on a lot lighter trails and also the road. Of course, I am fortunate enough to have both of these shoes, and I really love running in both of them. So I'll put it to you this way. If I were having to choose and pay for one of these shoes, pick one or the other, I would pick the Mount to Coast H1 purely on versatility and the fact that I'm getting almost all the way there as the 005 at, of course, half the price. On the other hand, if I were running this loop today, not doing this review, and I had to pick one trail shoe for this specific terrain, and probably say if I was running in this terrain all the time and I wanted a shoe for this loop, terrain like this loop, and I guess say putting aside the price, if I had to choose a shoe for this terrain, what do I like running in? What's the best shoe? What's more preferable? I would choose the Norda 005. So there you have it. No clickbait. My honest thoughts. I hope that helps you make the decision if you are choosing between one or the other. But if you are fortunate enough and do have the ability to have both, you won't be disappointed in either shoe. Thank you for tuning in once again to Humble Running. I've got that 10% discount code for the H1, affiliate link in the description for the 005. Those links, of course, don't cost you anything. You just click through and make the purchase as you normally would, and it helps support the channel. Perhaps if you're not interested in making a purchase and you just generally like my content and want to support the channel, I do have a Ko-Fi link that's always in the description and also on the support page of www.humblerunning.com. If you want to support the channel in that way, that also helps me out, of course. A cup of coffee here or there, or however they kind of equate that on ko-fi.com. Stay tuned. Lots of gear and apparel testing, especially on the way. TRE is coming up in a little over a month, so follow where you can, subscribe where you can, sign up to the newsletter, of course. Don't want to miss anything that's coming up in the very near future. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you out on the trails in the next one. Just finishing up my route here. Stop the clock, actually. Back at the trailhead here, about an hour 30, close to 10 miles. Last little thought here, as I was kind of coming down this small descent here, my feet feel a little fresher in the H1, a little bit more protected, and that's something I was talking about earlier when I was considering running in the 005 for a longer race. That adaptability underfoot comes at a cost, or depending how you look at it, you need strong feet for the 005 because there's less protection. Your foot is moving around a lot. More stuff is getting through the bottom of the shoe to your foot. So you need stronger feet. And it's just, I felt it a little more noticeable. Even 10 miles here on not too crazy terrain, but still rocky enough. I felt like I was like popping along at the end there in the H1, whereas the 005 felt like my feet were slightly worked. You know, it felt like a little bit, you know, the more adaptable. My ankle felt slightly like my foot took a little bit more kind of pressure or impact than the H1s.